Policy Matters. This is your boy Mongo Slade. So this video spins out of some real life stuff that's been taking place here. Here in Detroit, one of my grocery stores burned down. It was within the last 90 days. It was the only grocery store within a walkable area in this neighborhood. And it burned down. Like burned to the ground. Nobody did anything. And it's like a fire department right down the street from my house. And it's still burned out. So now there's no grocery store, no supermarket in this neighborhood. You have to go 2-3 neighborhoods over to find a grocery store. And you have to go walk almost a mile to get to a retail store like an Aldi's or something. We don't have now. Detroit is like a major city that does not have a Kroger within the city limits. There's no Kroger, there's no Walmart, there's no Meijer, and there has never been a mall within the city limits of Detroit. And I remember being in college when I asked that question when they were building a Meijers, but they were building it on 8 Mile. 8 Mile, for those of you who don't know, is outside of Detroit. That's the city limit, you know. So if you go across 8 Mile, that means you're outside of Detroit. They built a Meijers on 8 Mile, and people were throwing babies in the air like, finally, we got a Meijers. I'm like, it's not in Detroit. Like it's not in Detroit. You still have to go to 8 Mile to get to the Meijers. And there's plenty of like Krogers and stuff like that outside of Detroit. That's not a problem. There's a Walmart outside of Detroit. There's, Kroger outside of Detroit. Several Krogers outside of Detroit. But Kroger, there used to be a Kroger within the city limits, but it's gone now. And people never really asked the question, why did we not have a mall? Why did we not have Meijers inside the city limits? Why didn't we have any of these things? Why is it so hard to find a grocery store? And when you're in college, you talk to these people and they come up with what obviously their answer for everything is racism. Oh, well, it's just racist. You live in a food desert because racism. And I was like, I know that can't be it. That cannot be it. And thankfully, I was in college and I was learning to do research, and I did some research projects. And I really just did some independent research. I was thankful to have been taking an economic development course. And they was asking me about these kinds of questions. And I went and looked, and I came up with, it ties into crime. And because my undergrad was in criminal justice, I knew that things like robberies, things like burglaries, things like, all these types of crime, various, crime, even something as simple as what they call shirking, where, minor theft. Somebody steals a stick of deodorant from a Rite Aid or something like that. Those things can have incredible consequences on neighborhoods. And you had to think about it, because I had to think about it. You have to think about it in this term. Why is car insurance so high in Detroit? And I remember so many people saying like, I have to set up my car insurance somewhere else, even though I live in Detroit. And they'll say, well, I have to use an address, my cousin's address in, Roseville or something like that. And people will be like, why? They say, because car insurance is so ungodly high in Detroit. It's very cost prohibitive to even drive a car in Detroit. And most people but they understand it if you say, why is the car insurance so high in Detroit? And they'll say, because, this is one of the car theft capitals of the world. There's people who steal a lot of cars in Detroit. And having worked, closely with police, I know that is true. There's a lot of car theft in Detroit, a lot of car theft. And there's a lot of, people stealing parts off cars, people stealing cars and stripping them. My brother was actually the victim of a car theft ring several years ago. So all of this stuff is very personal, crime and different things like that. And you realize crime increases insurance, right? And if your insurance is up, people are less likely to have it. But the more you need the insurance, the more expensive it is, the less likely you are to get it. And if you're going to run a supermarket and you cannot get insurance, then you're not going to run a supermarket in that neighborhood. So that all brings us, that's a big preamble to what we're going to talk about today, which is the costs of crime on neighborhoods. This is something that Henry Hazlitt has talked about, something Thomas Sowell has talked about, but I'm not going to use any of them today. I'm just going to use basically insurance companies telling you that, yeah, that's what happened. The reason why you can't find a supermarket in your neighborhood is because of insurance companies. But it's also it's not just crime. When you think about those riots that took place over in the various cities over the course of 2019, 2018, 2020, that's going to devastate the local economy. Fewer, not just because, like I said, there's really aren't that many big box stores, not a lot of CVS's and stuff like that in these neighborhoods. I mean, they may have one per neighborhood, a Rite Aid or a CVS, but mostly these are going to be mom and pop shops, local gas stations, local supermarkets and stuff like that are being burned to the ground. And then the insurance companies are just going to charge them more for insurance because that's a high crime area now. And either they're not going to be able to afford it or they're going to be paying more later. Insurance almost never covers the entire cost, which is one thing people need to understand. It almost never covers the entire cost of a project. So if you get $1 million in damages, then the insurance company might cover 800,000 of it, depending on your policy. We'll go to a risk assessment company, and they'll talk about this kind of stuff too. But it might not cover the whole thing. You might still have to come out of pocket $200,000. But it's expected that you would have it. So we're going to talk about this. It says this is from the Washington Free Beacon. Insurance companies reap benefits from protests. Get in line with Black Lives Matter. So it says, this is from March 23rd, 2021. Following the death of George Floyd, the world's largest insurance company spoke up in favor of Black Lives Matter. Even as they were paying out unprecedented claims due to the destruction caused by Black Lives Matter protesters and those seizing their mantle, the companies issued statements and coughed up donations to support the movement. This summer's unrest cost the industry more than $1 billion in riot damage and the largest loss in U.S. history. Those losses are now in danger of affecting employees' pay, industry insiders said, but not their employers' stance. As February 18th, Chubb was planning a panel with Black Lives Matter whose promotional materials included a pro-Black Panther documentary and an enjoinder to quote-unquote stay woke, according to emails reviewed by Washington Free Beacon. For insiders who have been up close with the cost of the riots, the move is unsettling. Quote, it's just one of many examples of corporate virtue signaling, one Chubb employee told Free Beacon. Quote, it certainly doesn't represent the opinions and values of most people who work in the company. We're not Google or Facebook. The insurance industry is not unique. Among corporate America, Walmart, Target, and other stalwarts of quote-unquote woke capital have issued statements indicating their support for the protests while their stores were ransacked by rioters. Because those companies had insurance, however, they didn't have to pay for the looting. The insurers did. At first glance, the stance adopted by insurance giants might seem like a case of ideology trumping interests. Why would these corporations donate to a movement that had cost them billions unless they had decided to put social justice over shareholders? But something funny happened. Shareholders didn't lose money from the unrest. Instead, insurance stocks rose in the face of riot-related payouts. Chubb and AIG finished 2020 in about the same financial condition they entered it, overcoming a COVID-induced shock that temporarily wiped out their gains from the previous year. That may be because the insurance industry stands to profit from the destruction in the long run, one economist suggested, especially as many of the destroyed businesses were underinsured, which is what I just said. You may have $1 million in damages, but your insurance only covers $500,000. So that's what called quote unquote being underinsured. There really is no such thing. You make your own deals. In Minneapolis, for example, insurance covered only half the city's losses, which were connected among immigrant and minority-owned stores. That will increase demand for property insurance and drive up rates, according to R.J. Lehman, a senior fellow of insurance policy at International Center for Law and Economics. It's never good for insurance to have to pay out claims, Lehman told Free Beacon, but it's good for them if businesses are worried about civil unrest. Quote, higher uncertainty makes more people want to buy coverage, he says, and makes them willing to pay more for coverage. In other words, you're going to have more clients paying more in the long run. In the short run, you have to pay that money out, sure. But in the long run, you're going to have higher rates and you're going to have more people buying coverage. That's how they make their money. Okay, so at the time, it makes insurance more expensive. Quote, it would not be surprising if the risk of urban conflagrations increased rates or made insurance less available. This is what I just said about crime and, the availability of insurance. In part because insurers try to avoid concentrating risk in any particular area. Industry insiders echoed this analysis, saying rates have gone up in the wake of the unrest. That's especially true in urban areas hit hard by riots. The Chubb employee added, rate hikes will allow insurers to make up their losses, but only at the poorer client's expense. The dynamic amounts to a poignant refutation of the adage, get woke, go broke. Insurance companies haven't suffered for their support of Black Lives Matter and could even benefit from it. If anyone goes broke, it won't be the insurers, but rather the small business owners struggling to buy insurance, a struggle compounded by the pandemic, the costs of which insurance companies have refused to cover. Because, and this is from, I'm going to read this later about the risk assessment company, but I'm going to give it to you right now. They don't cover loss of business, meaning if your store cannot open due to whatever reason, insurance companies do not cover that because that's not considered damage to the property. So if your business was shuttered by the pandemic due to lockdowns, you're not getting anything. That's just money that you're not going to have, which means you haven't been paying your insurance in any way. So if your store gets burned down, it is what it is. Also, compounding that struggle is a history of redlining. Quote, insurance companies may say they're colorblind. Robert Hunter, a former insurance commissioner, told Fortune in the wake of the unrest. But they're not zip code blind. Not zip code blind. That's a great thing to remember. That's one thing I learned in CompStat. You may say, I don't care who lives in that area. We're talking about the area. The people just happen to live in that area. During the Rodney King riots in 1992, many minority-owned businesses or minority-owned business owners risked confrontation with criminals because they knew their policies wouldn't cover much damage. Similar scenes played out across the United States last year as underinsured shopkeepers took up arms against vandals. If you remember the Rooftop Koreans, who were, carrying guns and being on top of their roofs and pointing down their guns at rioters during the 1992 Los Angeles riots, what they call the Rodney King riots. What they call the Rodney King riots. That there's something similar that took place over all of the various riots and in the various cities across the United States these days. Okay, so other shopkeepers just pleaded, often to no avail. Please, I don't have insurance, an Iraqi immigrant told looters who were targeting his Minneapolis deli. Some black-owned businesses put up signs identifying as such, hoping that would deter attacks. In many cases, it did not. By supporting Black Lives Matter, then, insurance companies are effectively supporting a movement that will reduce coverage for African Americans. As unrest intensifies, they will raise rates, and the market will reach a new equilibrium, one in which insurers are fine, but poorer policyholders may not be. All right, so that's the end of the Free Beacon article. This is very interesting because this is facts. It is facts that, if your car gets stolen, what happens? The cost of your car insurance goes up. So if your store gets burned down, then the cost of your store, cost of insurance to your store goes up. If you have higher rates of burglary, somebody smashing the windows and going in and stealing a bunch of stuff, the cost of insurance just went up, especially if it's a high crime neighborhood already. So this is also why, and I should explain this here. This is also why food costs more in the hood. You may be able to buy a bundle of bananas for less outside of the hood than you can in the hood because you have to tack on the cost of risk, which is the crime risk, the crime area. People don't understand that either. So, they'll say, the neighborhoods are being fleeced by these outsiders. Usually, like the store that I frequented, it was burned down, and I did hear people say, "Oh well, there was Chaldeans or whatever that owned the store anyway. They weren't black people." And I would say, like, look, they're willing to pay the extra cost to put a store in this zip code in this area. They have to pay more. You know, their insurance costs are going to be higher. The cost of getting into it with the locals, you know, is higher because you're almost always going to have more conflict in these densely populated areas, even though it's not as densely populated as it used to be. But people don't understand that. They don't care. You know, they don't care. They just follow policies that think that where, you know, these things, they can just blame everything on racism. So this was from August the 3rd, 2007. No more supermarkets. Major grocers flee Detroit. So this was from 2007. So I wasn't in college yet, but I remember this vividly. I remember having this conversation more than one time in various different classes with various different people of various different races, and nobody could answer this question. You know, when they just talk about food deserts, that word is actually used here. They just say it's racism. But this is from NPR, by the way. So if you're interested in that sort of thing. Detroit shoppers are having a challenging time finding a place to purchase their food in what some are calling quote-unquote food deserts. Supermarket analyst David Livingston and developer Michael Curis offer their take on what's happening in Detroit. So we're going to skip to what was this? This is Cheryl Corley is the host. And she's talking to Curious Enterprises, which is based in Detroit. I think it's right outside of Detroit. It's in, I think it's in Sterling Heights. And David Livingston is a supermarket site analyst. So these are people who do this for a living, right? So Corley asks, we've been talking with a resident of Detroit who told us about challenges that she and her family and her neighbors face since there is no major supermarket chain in the city. Kroger Supermarket, which bought the Farmer Jack stores, said in a statement that it would take a pass on Detroit because it had tested the market for 3 years unsuccessfully and then left. David Livingston, what are the challenges grocery store chains face when they enter a market like Detroit? Here's what Livingston says. Well, they do have quite a few challenges. The first challenge is they have a difficulty in making profit. They're having a lot of difficulty in finding store managers willing to come down and work in the store. A lot of times, these areas will have a perceived high crime rate. Even if the crime rate isn't high, as long as it's perceived as high, that tends to scare away both sometimes employees and customers. In other words, people who are middle class don't want to work in the neighborhoods. And if you can't find people to run the store, even if you can afford the insurance and all that type of stuff, you probably won't be able to find people to be able to run the store. It says another issue is that not often talked about is the fact that a lot of children are given free breakfast and lunch at schools. And this source of eats into the supermarket's business. This is a situation that often is not encountered out in the suburbs, believe it or not. So look at that. That's something that's an unintended consequence of giving food away, is that you do eat into the supermarkets. Nobody ever thought about that. Nobody ever talks about that kind of stuff. I say all the time that people need to pay attention to how different things work. Now, I'm not saying you don't give food away. I think you should probably still give food away, because this will also apply to food banks, right? If a food bank is giving away food, they don't turn anyone away. So that means whether you're homeless or you're just lazy, you can go to a food bank and get food. They don't even ask whether you're homeless or not. So a food bank or a church that gives away food, which I've worked in some of those places too, they can eat into a supermarket because they give away food rather than people coming to buy it. But at the same time, children is a big thing with supermarkets, because there's that government money. It's called WIC. It's women and children, or it's I forget what the actual policy is called, but WIC is a government program that gives money to women who have children, and it allows them to buy things like cereal and milk and eggs and stuff like that. Other things other than candy and stuff like that. So, but it's for women and children. And if you have spaces that are giving away food specifically for children, and you're eating into the supermarket because they're trying to get that government money, that's not said here, but it's true. So, so Corley says, okay, and so would that really scare a supermarket away from the area? Mr. Livingston says, well, it lowers the potential of sales potential in a given area when you're taking some of the food demand away from the supermarkets. So Corley asks, Michael Curious, your company is based in Detroit. You're focusing on building urban retail centers. How have you been able to meet some of the challenges that David describes? Mr. Curious, rather. Everybody wants these businesses to be profitable because then they'll stay and thrive and expand. And it's been a very big struggle. So what we try to do to solve these problems, for instance, the crime problem, we do police mini stations on site. So we actually sign leases with the police department, obviously for no rent. They don't pay rent, but they have the availability to come into the shopping center, sit at the desk in the air-conditioned office, and do their reports. They're computerized back to the headquarters, and it creates a police presence. They may not be there all the time, but it's a deterrent. We have security cameras in the parking lot. We build the center with a safety in mind. For instance, we'll have decorative fencing on a perimeter rather than razor wire or barbed wire, but it does the same thing. It's not tall enough to jump over, yet it's the beautiful design so that it's pleasing to the eye. This was, again, published in 2007, right? None of this would be applicable today. Most people, if you talk about Black Lives Matter and different types of protests, they are against police being present. A lot of them are also against security cameras. A lot of them are against things like protective glass. You may have seen in some of these beauty supply stores or in Rite Aids or something like that, things that are more likely to be stolen are put inside of a protective glass. There have been people who have been said that's racist, so you have to get rid of that. And so you have seen stores start to acquiesce and take down those little glasses, and of course, theft goes up. So this was in 2007. They're telling you all the different security things that they try to do to prevent people from stealing, to prevent people from doing damage to financial damage to these companies, so that people will invest. But over the years, because people just blame racism for everything, what you see is they're chipping away at this. So they don't want police on the grounds anymore. And then they don't want security cameras. I'll give you another example. In a lot of the inner cities, porch pirating is a big issue, right? If you don't know what porch pirating is if Amazon wants to deliver a package and you're not at home, they put it on the porch, right? What you will have is there will be people watching, and they'll snatch your package off the porch and they'll take it and resell it. That's called porch pirating. So what Amazon started doing, they started selling those cameras that you put on your porch so that you could see people coming onto your porch, and that would catch porch pirates. People started saying that was racist, that you shouldn't be able to sell those because that was making people suspicious of black people who were coming onto their porch. It was supposed to be a deterrent for your house. There are some people who have private security, private cameras on their houses. I used to go from house to house. You would see those things. You would also see the porch pirating cameras that would be right there in your face. So there. And I used to work with a lady who had one of those things. If somebody was on her porch, her phone would ring, and then she would be able to check it and see, if somebody was walking around on her porch. She would get like live video if somebody was on her porch. People have started saying that type of stuff is racist. So all this stuff they're saying in 2007 would be called racist today. Barbed wire, razor wire, protective glass around certain things, police mini stations, video, all this type of stuff is considered racist. Even though the point of it is to lower the risk so that people will invest. They don't seem to care. So Corey says, let's talk a little bit about those security measures that you subscribe. Wrought iron fences, I understand, are part of this as well. These on-site police mini station security cameras. What's to keep people who are shopping there to keep them from feeling like they're distrusted? Curious responded, the reason we do the wrought iron fencing, for instance, is decorative. Now it just happens to play a dual role. It's 4 foot tall, so they're not really scalable, not easily scalable. They are pointed at the top, but it does not look like razor wire. It solves a dual purpose. The security cameras in the parking lot aren't really visible. It would give a feeling of safety, not of distrust. So Corley responds, a recent report we studied said Detroit is a food desert in the sense that food shopping options are severely limited. You have predominantly fast food joints in the area, liquor stores that have a small number of food options available, corner stores, that sort of thing. Michael, you're working to bring in grocery store into Detroit, and I'm not going to do a commercial, but it is Aldi, as I understand it. Can that type of low frills kind of bargain supermarket address some of the concerns that residents have about the lack of fresh produce and other fresh products? Curious responded, it absolutely is. We've discussed with Aldi the issue of their product line. For instance, different parts of Detroit will have different ethnicities, whether they're African American, Hispanic, and you need to tailor your store, your mix to those areas. So maybe 80% of the store can sell the same product as all the other stores, but they should have 20% that's tailored to the neighbor that they're in. So we've been working with Aldi, and again, Aldi is based in Germany. They have 5,000 stores around the world, 1,000 of them here in the U.S., and they are now coming to Detroit. They've asked us to do numerous stores for them in the city of Detroit, and we're working on those stores right now. And again, the issue of shrinking population, the city of Detroit has roughly 850,000 people. If you told a retailer he could go into an area that was void of competition and have 850,000 people, they would jump at it. They should be jumping at it, but they're not. They're not. This Aldi store that you're talking about in this article is the Aldi store I was talking about earlier. It is not far from my house. Okay. There's another Aldi store right on 8 Mile. 8 Mile is a long strip, so I'm not talking about Myers and Aldi's being on the same block. Think of 8 Mile. If it's a city limit, so it's like all around the city. It's a long stretch. So there's 8 Mile that goes into different cities. So it's like cross 8 Mile going to Roseville, cross 8 Mile going to Sterling Heights, cross 8 Mile going to Royal Oak, whatever. So the Aldi's that they're talking about here is the Aldi's that's down the street from my house. It's about a mile away. It's walking distance. It's good exercise. And there is a police mini station right there. There's a Family Dollar right there as well. Family Dollar, for you who don't know, is a place where you can go buy deodorant and snacks and base level pharmaceuticals like aspirin and heartburn medicine and stuff like that. Pepto-Bismol, that kind of stuff. So it's a shopping center. There's restaurants there. You can get your ID and your driver's license and all that type of stuff there. I'm losing. I think some people call it the DMV. We call it the Secretary of State. So then you have the Rite Aid is there and different stuff like that. So that area is pretty well protected, and it's right on the border of another city. Right, it's not 8 Mile, but it's on Mac. So it's like you go down Mac, eventually you go into another city. So Mac is another long strip in Detroit, but it doesn't cross the city limits. So you have this. Well, yes, it does. I just said that. Anyway, you have police mini station and all that type of stuff down there where the Aldi's is, and the one on 8 Mile doesn't have a police mini station in that area. Doesn't really need it because it's on 8 Mile, So you have the police from the other suburban areas that are constantly patrolling that area. So this is very long, but I want to get into something else. We're gonna skip through this because this is already gone longer than I wanted it to. We're going to get into the risk assessment companies. So we're going to talk about companies that are, so this is from Marsh. This is it's called the Basics of Commercial Insurance. And they're going to go through what insurance companies will cover normally. This is just all just general information because your actual coverage and stuff like that will be different. It says the basics of commercial crime insurance. Commercial crime insurance provides protection from financial losses related to business-related crime, including theft by employees, forgery, robbery, and electronic crime. While strong internal protocols can help a company avoid fraud, dishonest employees, and external fraudsters can circumvent the security of even the most well-run companies, and ones with the most robust controls, leading to potentially substantial financial losses. So it says, although employees remain the greatest area of concern for organizations, a crime policy generally also covers losses caused by specific acts of non-employees, including theft, damage, or destruction of money, securities, and or other property, both on the insured's premises or elsewhere. For instance, in transit. So that would be if somebody were to destroy products as they're in transport. Forgery or alteration of negotiable instruments, including forging of the insured's signature on business checks, fraudulent manipulation of the insurance computer system, including a hacker transferring funds to an outside account, fraudulent electronic funds transfer instructions sent to the insurance bank purporting to be the insured, receipt of counterfeit currency by the insured, or social engineering fraud. The consequences of these and any above crimes can be financially devastating for companies that can lead to severe reputational harm, making crime insurance an essential part of a company's arsenal. Additionally, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974 requires any person handling funds of a qualified employee benefit plan to be bonded, a feature that is typically included in a commercial crime policy. So key coverage provisions. So crime coverage can vary by insurer, but policies generally share the same characteristics. A typical crime insurance policy is written on a named perils basis, which means that a loss must fall within one of the categories of crimes specified in the policy to trigger coverage. In other words, some insurance companies may have riot insurance, right, where it has to be categorized as a riot rather than individuals stealing. So if somebody steals from your store, but it's not during a riot, that's a different situation. Just like if it's not like fire, insurance where you set a fire and regardless of how the fire started, of course, unless it's self-inflicted fire, in which case that's fraud. But in most cases, this kind of thing will not be triggered. For commercial crime policies, the limit is usually not aggregated, applying separately to each and every loss. Although deductibles apply separately to each loss, a series of acts by the same person or same group of persons are deemed as a single loss, and thus subject to one limit and one deductible, regardless of how long the theft continues prior to being discovered. So there is no deductible applicable to losses sustained by benefit plans that are not required to be bonded by IRSA, or that are required to be bonded by IRSA. So this is like, I've already gone on too long, but this is that's a little bit of it. So it says what's typically not covered. Although policies can vary, the following are typically not covered by crime insurance: losses caused by employees after the insured has knowledge of a crime committed by that employee. In other words, if you find out an employee is stealing, and then you have 60 to 90 days to tell people that, hey, this employee's been stealing. Anything beyond that window, they're not going to cover it, or companies typically won't cover it. Indirect or consequential losses of any nature, such as a business interruption or potential loss of income. This is the lockdowns, right? So if that's a business interruption, but it has nothing to do with you being victimized. It has nothing to do with if you were locked down, that's not typically going to be covered in your insurance. Legal expenses incurred in compiling a proof of loss, unless claims investigative expense coverage is included in the policy. So, if you have to hire a lawyer, they're not going to cover. That's obviously not going to be covered in your insurance. But that's also one of the costs that's going to come with dealing with insurance companies and dealing with the police and different things like that. There's going to be legal costs. There's going to be investigation costs because you're going to have to hire individual investigators and different things like that to assess the damage in your area. So this is the type of stuff that if you are running a store, you have to know. You have to know, okay, I have to investigate this robbery in my neighborhood. There's going to be the police, but there's also going to be some type of third party assessment of what was this worth that was stolen from your neighborhood or stolen from your property. Data theft is not covered, including theft of a company's data, trade secrets, client list, or intellectual property. Property damage caused by fire, fines and penalties, salaries and bonuses, commissions, fees, and any associated lost income, losses based solely on inventory records. So there's a lot of things that are not covered that may still happen during crimes, right? So I've talked about almost 40 minutes, which I really only plan to do about 30 minutes. The preamble went a little bit longer than I thought. But this is why you have food deserts. This is why you have trouble finding supermarkets in the neighborhoods. This is why you have such a difficult time finding malls in inner cities, because insurance rates, crime, or just perception, sometimes it could just be perception, it's all cost prohibitive. It's all cost prohibitive. And the riots does not help. Anybody who says that the riots did anything positive, they don't know anything about riots historically. I could have gone backwards. I could have talked about Detroit completely in this entire article and just went back to when Detroit had their riots in the 60s. And there's still areas of this city that are burned down since the 60s. Nobody has gone back to fix it, or nobody hasn't even thought about doing anything to increase the those areas. They're fire damaged, and it's over. I remember my dad used to sit down and talk to me about how the city looked before the riots, and then how the city looks after the riots, and it's only been looking worse. I was in a neighborhood that I used to live in back when I was 11, 12 years old, and it looks like a ghost town now. You know, so all the schools I've ever went to are closed, with the exception of the university I went to. All my middle school was closed. My kindergarten is closed. Everything is closed. My high school was closed. That's just the fact of living in Detroit. You know, that's one of the things that, and that's, you know, it takes a certain level of trauma. You know, when you don't get to have a high school reunion. I didn't finish high school anyway, but you don't get to have a high school reunion because that's something people see talk about all the time. Like, oh, we're about to have our 15-year high school reunion. 15 years after I left high school, not even 10 years afterwards, that school was done. Okay, so it was closed, and it was a public school. So you know how bad you have to be doing for a public school to close? Anyway, but that explains a lot of different things. Crime rates affect all types of insurance, and if car insurance, housing insurance, all this different stuff, and it's cost prohibitive to invest in these areas because of the crime rates. And riots are crime. Whether nobody tell you that it's a specific type of crime. They may say you need riot insurance, but it's crime all the same because people are going in there. They're going to steal, break windows, different things like that. So that's today's Policy Matters from Mongo Slade. Thank you guys for your time, and I'll talk to you guys later.
Yeah.